You know that feeling when your world tilts sideways in a single heartbeat? When everything you thought you knew about your life crumbles like old newspaper in the rain. I'm María Elena, and at 65, I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I knew my husband of 42 years, thought I understood the rhythms of our family, the predictable dance of our daily life. God, how wrong I was. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the kind of day where the autumn light filters through the windows just right, casting everything in that golden, peaceful glow that makes you believe the world is good. I had just finished my volunteer shift at the local hospital, something I'd been doing for 15 years, ever since I retired from teaching. My hands still smelled faintly of the lavender hand sanitizer they use in the pediatric ward, and my heart was still warm from reading stories to the children there. I decided to surprise Roberto with lunch. We'd been married for so long that surprises had become rare treasures, and lately I'd felt us drifting into that comfortable but distant routine that long marriages sometimes fall into. He'd been working late more often, claiming the law firm needed extra attention as they prepared for some big merger. At 67, he should have been thinking about retirement, but Roberto had always been driven, ambitious. It's one of the things that first attracted me to him when we were young. I stopped by our favorite Italian place, the same one where we'd had our first date in 1982. The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled my car as I drove to his office, and I found myself humming along to an old song on the radio. I was genuinely happy, content, looking forward to seeing the surprise on his face when I walked in with his favorite chicken parmigiana. The law offices of Mendoza and Associates occupied the entire third floor of a sleek downtown building. I'd been there countless times over the years. Christmas parties, retirement dinners, casual visits. The receptionist, Sandra, knew me well and always greeted me with genuine warmth. But that day, Sandra wasn't at her desk. The entire front area was empty, eerily quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" but got no response. The hallways felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was just the unusual silence, or maybe some part of me already sensed what was coming. You know how sometimes your body knows things before your mind catches up? Roberto's office was at the end of the hall, behind heavy oak doors with his name etched in gold letters. Those doors had always represented success to me, stability, the life we'd built together. I remember adjusting my purse strap, smoothing down my blouse, and thinking about how I'd tease him about working through lunch again. I turned the handle, it wasn't locked, and pushed the door open with my shoulder, my hands full with the takeout bag. "Honey, I brought you some—" The words died in my throat. Time has this cruel way of slowing down during moments that destroy you. Every detail becomes crystal clear, burned into your memory with surgical precision. Roberto was there all right, behind his massive mahogany desk, but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't working. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, was sitting on his lap, not beside him, not in the chair across from his desk where clients usually sat, but on his lap, her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers threading through his silver hair, the same hair I'd watched turn gray over 20 years of marriage. Her sundress, a yellow one I'd complimented just last week at our family barbecue, was hiked up around her thighs, and Roberto's hands were— God, I can barely say it even now. His hands were on her waist, pulling her closer. They were kissing, not a peck on the cheek, not some innocent family affection, but kissing with the passion of lover, deep, hungry, desperate kisses that spoke of familiarity, of routine, of something that had been going on for far longer than a moment of weakness. The takeout bag slipped from my hands, the sound of containers hitting the floor, the splatter of marinara sauce across the expensive Persian rug. That's what broke the spell. They jerked apart like teenagers caught by parents. But the damage was done. The image was seared into my brain forever. Sophia's lipstick was smeared. Roberto's shirt was partially unbuttoned, and both of them were staring at me with expressions I'll never forget. Not shame, not remorse, but fear. Fear of being caught, fear of consequences, fear of losing whatever sick game they'd been playing. "Maria," Roberto started, his voice hoarse. He tried to stand, gently moving Sophia off his lap, but his movements were shaky, uncertain. "This isn't— we were just what?" The words came out as barely a whisper. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this scene happen to someone else. "Just what, Roberto?" Sophia finally found her voice, though she couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, I can explain." "Don't!" The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through the air like a blade. "Don't you dare call me Mom right now." The silence that followed was deafening. 42 years of marriage, 30 years of loving Sophia like my own daughter, of welcoming her into our family. When she married our son Miguel, of being there for her through her pregnancy, through the difficult early years of their marriage, through every family celebration and crisis. All of it felt like a lie now, an elaborate performance I'd been too naive to see through. My mind started racing, connecting dots I'd been blind to before. The way Sophia had been coming by the house more often when Miguel was at work. The way Roberto had been taking her calls at all hours, claiming it was family business or helping with their financial planning. The new jewelry she'd been wearing lately, pieces Miguel's teacher salary could never afford. The way they'd started sharing inside jokes at family dinners, little glances I'd interpreted as natural affection between father-in-law and daughter-in-law. God, how long had this been going on? How long had I been the fool in my own life? I bent down slowly, mechanically, and started picking up the scattered containers, the plastic utensil, pieces of what had been our lunch. My hands were trembling, but I forced them to be steady. I could feel them watching me, probably wondering what I was going to do, what I was going to say. But here's the thing about betrayal of this magnitude. It doesn't just break your heart, it transforms you. Something inside me was shifting, hardening, crystallizing into something I'd never been before. The María Elena who had walked into that office, the devoted wife, the loving mother-in-law, the woman who believed in family and forgiveness and second chances, she was gone. What was rising in her place was someone entirely different, someone dangerous. The drive home was a blur of red lights and horn honks that seemed to come from another dimension. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. But I didn't cry, not yet. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford, until I figured out exactly what I was going to do with this nuclear bomb that had just exploded in my chest. Our house, the house Roberto and I had bought 38 years ago, where we'd raised our 3 children, where we'd hosted countless family gatherings, looked different as I pulled into the driveway, like it belonged to strangers. The rose bushes I'd planted along the front walkway, the swing Roberto had installed on the porch when our first grandchild was born, even the mailbox with our names painted in cheerful blue letters. Everything felt like props in a play I no longer wanted to be part of. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at our front door and thinking about all the times Sophia had walked through it. All the Sunday dinners where she'd sat at our table, complimenting my cooking, asking for family recipe, playing with her children, our grandchildren, in the backyard, while Roberto and I watched with such pride and contentment. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, the woman I'd helped pick out her wedding dress, whose hand I'd held in the hospital when little Carmen was born. I'd loved her like my own daughter, defended her when Miguel complained about her spending, celebrated her small victories, comforted her through her struggles with postpartum depression. And Roberto, my Roberto, who used to bring me coffee in bed every morning for the first 20 years of our marriage, who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, my cancer scare in 2019, every crisis and celebration we'd weathered together, the man who'd whispered, "I love you," in my ear just that morning before leaving for work. But as I sat there, something else started rising alongside the pain and betrayal. It was cold and sharp and focused in a way I'd never experienced before. You see, people underestimate women my age. They see gray hair and laugh lines and assume we're fragile, that we'll crumble when faced with cruelty, that we'll cry and forgive and try to hold families together at any cost. They're wrong. I'd been a high school principal for 25 years before I retired. I'd handled drug dealers trying to infiltrate my school, parents threatening lawsuits, school board politics that would make Congress look civilized. I'd raised 3 children, buried both my parents, survived breast cancer, and built a marriage I thought was unshakable. I wasn't some delicate flower who would wilt under pressure. I was a woman who knew how to plan. Inside the house, I moved with mechanical precision. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, to keep my hands steady, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same kind Roberto used for his case note. The irony wasn't lost on me. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What I know." Sophia and Roberto were having an affair based on their comfort level, their familiarity with each other's bodies. It wasn't new. I estimated it had been going on for at least 6 months, possibly longer. They'd been meeting at his office, probably during lunch hours when Sandra was away. Sophia had been using her visits to our house as cover, her, coming by when she knew Roberto would be there. Next, I wrote, "What they don't know, I know." Roberto had been sloppy with money lately. Not dramatically, but I balanced our checkbooks and had noticed unexplained expenses, cash withdrawals that were larger than usual, credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, jewelry stores, hotels. I'd asked about them casually, and he'd always had explanation. Client dinners, gifts for business associates, conferences. I'd believed him because why wouldn't I? We'd never had trust issues before. But now those explanations felt thin, suspicious. I could trace a paper trail if I needed to. Sophia had been different lately too. More confident, more secretive with her phone, buying clothes and jewelry that seemed expensive for someone whose husband made a teacher's salary. When I'd commented on a beautiful new necklace she was wearing last month, she'd said it was a gift from Miguel for their anniversary. But I knew Miguel. He shopped at department store sale and usually asked me for gift suggestions. That necklace had cost serious money. I also knew something else that neither of them suspected. I'd been handling Roberto's retirement planning for the past 5 years. I had access to all our accounts, knew every investment, every asset, every debt. I'd been the one managing our finances while he focused on his legal work, and I'd been good at it. Very good. The third section of my notes was the most important. What I want. This took longer to write because the answer surprised me. I didn't want forgiveness or reconciliation or couples therapy. I didn't want to confront them and have some tearful scene where they begged for my forgiveness and promised it would never happen again. I'd moved past that possibility the moment I saw Sophia's hands in Roberto's hair. The moment I understood that this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, but a calculated betrayal of everything our family was supposed to mean. What I wanted was justice, not revenge. That was too emotional, too sloppy. Justice was clean, precise, deserved. I wanted them to face consequences for their choices. I wanted their comfortable lives disrupted the way they'd disrupted mine. I wanted them to understand that actions have prices, and some prices are higher than others. But most of all, I wanted my dignity intact when this was over. I refused to be the pathetic older woman who'd been discarded for a younger model. I refused to be pitied or whispered about at family gatherings. I would not be the victim in this story. My phone buzzed. A text from Roberto. "Maria, we need to talk when I get home. Please don't do anything rash. Don't do anything rash." After 42 years of marriage, he thought I was the type of person who would do something rash. The condescension in those words, the assumption that I was some hysterical woman who needed to be managed, made my decision even easier. I texted back, "Of course, honey. I'll make dinner. We'll talk then." Let him think I was going to be reasonable, manageable, forgiving. Let them both think they could control the narrative, minimize the damage, find a way to make this my problem to solve. They had no idea what was coming. I spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls, not to lawyers or marriage counselors or my children. Those conversations would come later, when I was ready, when I had everything in place. Instead, I called my cousin Elena in Phoenix, who'd gone through a spectacular divorce 5 years earlier and come out on top. I called my old friend Patricia, who worked in private investigation. I called my financial advisor and scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning. By the time Roberto's key turned in the front door that evening, I had the foundation of a plan that would change all our lives forever. I was setting the table for dinner, humming the same song I'd been humming that morning when I'd driven to his office with Italian food and a heart full of love. But the woman setting that table wasn't the same woman who'd left the house that morning. She looked the same, moved the same, even smiled the same when Roberto walked into the kitchen looking nervous and guilty and hopeful that his wife would be reasonable about his betrayal. "Smells wonderful," he said, kissing my cheek the way he had thousands of times before. "Your favorite," I replied, serving the chicken parmigiana I'd picked up from the same Italian place. It had been sitting in the refrigerator all day, but it would do for this performance. "Sit down, honey. Let's talk." 3 months later, I stood in the courthouse parking lot, watching Roberto load boxes into his Honda Civic, the same Honda he'd been driving for 8 years because he'd always claimed we needed to be practical with money. Funny how practical he'd been with our money while spending freely on hotels and jewelry for Sophia. The divorce had been swift and decisive. When you have 42 years of documentation, detailed financial records, and a private investigator's report showing 6 months of documented infidelity, there's not much room for negotiation. Roberto's law firm colleagues had been shocked, not by the affair apparently, but by how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered one of the city's most experienced attorneys. You see, people think revenge is about anger, about losing control and lashing out. But the most effective revenge is actually about patience, planning, and precision. It's about understanding exactly what someone values most, and then systematically dismantling it. Roberto valued his reputation above everything else. He'd spent 40 years building his standing in the legal community, his image as a family man, his role as the respected patriarch of our extended family. So that's where I struck first. The private investigator Patricia recommended was worth every penny. Within 2 weeks, I had photographs, credit card receipts, hotel records, and even recording, because apparently Roberto and Sofia had been careless enough to meet at the same hotel restaurant where Roberto sometimes took legitimate clients. The staff remembered them. They remembered how he'd hold her hand across the table, how they'd disappear upstairs together, how he'd pay in cash and think that made it untraceable. But I didn't release any of that information immediately. Instead, I used it as leverage. I scheduled separate meetings with both of them. Roberto first, then Sofia. I presented my evidence calmly, professionally, the way I used to present disciplinary cases to the school board. I watched their faces go pale as they realized how much I knew, how long I'd been quietly gathering proof while they thought I was just a naive old woman who could be managed. Then I gave them each a choice. Roberto could agree to an uncontested divorce with my term, a generous settlement for me. Plus, he'd pay for Miguel and Sofia's marriage counseling and the children's therapy. Or I'd contest everything and make sure every detail of his affair became public record. His law partners, his clients, his golf buddies, everyone at our church, every family member would know exactly what kind of man he really was. Sofia got a simpler ultimatum. Tell Miguel herself within 1 week, or I would tell him and show him every piece of evidence I'd gathered. You should have seen them scramble. Roberto agreed to my terms within hours, probably calculating that a financial hit was preferable to professional humiliation. Sofia took longer. 3 days of agonized phone calls where she begged me to reconsider, to think about the children, to remember how much I'd once loved her. I did love you, I told her during our final conversation. That's what makes this so unforgivable, she told Miguel on a Thursday evening. I know because he called me at 11 o'clock that night, sobbing into the phone, asking how long I'd known, asking why I hadn't warned him. That conversation nearly broke my resolve, hearing my son's pain, knowing I could have prevented some of it if I'd acted differently. But I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who'd caused this pain. I'd simply refused to be the only one suffering from it. The aftermath was messier than I'd anticipated. Miguel filed for divorce within a month. Sofia moved back in with her parents, taking the children with her. Our family gatherings became awkward negotiations about who would attend what events. The grandchildren, Carmen and little Diego, kept asking why Abuelo Roberto didn't come to Sunday dinners anymore, why Mama Sofia cried so much, why everyone seemed angry all the time. But here's what I learned about justice versus revenge. Revenge would have been destroying them both completely, salting the earth so nothing could grow back. Justice was about proportional consequences, about making sure the people who'd betrayed trust faced appropriate results for their choices. Roberto lost his marriage and had to rebuild his life at 67, but he kept his law practice and his relationship with our children. He could start over if he chose to. Sofia lost her marriage and her comfortable life, but she had her youth, her children, and the support of her family. She could rebuild too. Most importantly, they both learned that actions have consequences, that betrayal has costs, that you can't just assume the people you hurt will quietly absorb your damage and pretend it never happened. As for me, I got something I hadn't expected when this all started. I got myself back. For 42 years, I'd been Roberto's wife first, a mother second, and María Elena somewhere down the list. I'd organized my entire identity around supporting other people's dreams, managing other people's needs, keeping other people's lives running smoothly. Now, at 65, I was just me, and I discovered I actually liked who that was. I kept the house. Roberto couldn't afford to fight me on it, and honestly, I think he was grateful I hadn't pushed for more. I redecorated it completely, erasing 40 years of compromise and choosing things I actually wanted for the first time in decades. Bold colors instead of Roberto's preferred neutral, modern furniture instead of his traditional preferences, art that spoke spoke to me. Instead of safe landscapes that offended no one, I started traveling. Paris first, because I'd always wanted to see it, and Roberto had always found excuses to go somewhere else. Then Italy, then a photography tour of Ireland that led to a new hobby I never knew I'd love. I bought a camera and started documenting the world through my own eyes, instead of through the lens of what other people needed from me. I went back to school and got certified to teach English as a second language. 3 days a week I work with immigrant families, helping them navigate their new lives in America. It's challenging and rewarding in ways I'd forgotten work could be. And yes, I started dating. Nothing serious, nothing that threatens my hard-won independence, but companionship with men who see me as María Elena first, not as someone's wife or mother or grandmother. It's been a revelation, discovering that I'm still attractive, still interesting, still capable of surprising myself and others. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Sophia at the grocery store. She looked tired but not broken, pushing a cart with Diego strapped in the front and Carmen walking alongside, chattering about her upcoming birthday party. "Maria," she said quietly, stopping her cart when she saw me. "How are you?" "I'm well," I said, and meant it. "How are the children?" We talked for a few minutes about normal things. Diego's new word, Carmen's progress in kindergarten, the weather. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the conversation of two women who'd once cared about each other and now had to navigate a complicated new reality. As I was leaving, Sophia called my name. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry for all of it." I looked at her for a long moment, this young woman who'd been part of my family for so many years, who'd made choices that changed all our lives irrevocably. "I know you are," I said finally. "Take care of those babies, Sophia. They need their mother to be strong." That night I called Miguel and told him about the encounter. He'd been struggling with anger. At Sophia, at Roberto, at me for not handling things differently, at the whole situation that had blown up his life. But something about hearing that his ex-wife was focused on being a good mother to his children seemed to ease something in him. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" he asked. It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. Forgiveness is complicated when the betrayal cuts so deep, when it changes not just your present but forces you to re-examine your entire past. How much of my marriage had been real? How many family moments had been contaminated by their secret? How long had I been the fool in my own life? "I don't know," I told my son honestly. "But I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you owe other people. It's something you give yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight of their choices. Are you ready?" I looked around my living room now, decorated with my choices, filled with photographs from my travels, books I'd chosen, art that made me smile. Outside, the garden I'd redesigned was coming into bloom, planted with flowers I loved instead of the practical shrubs Roberto had preferred. "I'm getting there," I said, and I was, not because Roberto and Sophia deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved the peace that would come with letting go of their betrayal. They'd already taken enough from me, my marriage, my trust, my sense of security. I wouldn't let them take my future too. Today, almost a year later, I'm writing this story because people need to understand something important. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to break you. It doesn't have to turn you into a victim or a bitter woman who warns others about the dangers of trusting too much. Sometimes betrayal can be a gift you never wanted, the gift of discovering who you really are when everything familiar is stripped away, the gift of learning you're stronger than you thought, more resilient than you imagined, more capable of rebuilding than you ever believed possible. I'm not grateful for what Roberto and Sophia did to our family. The damage they caused ripples through all our lives still, but I'm grateful for who I became in response to their choices. I'm grateful for the life I've built from the ashes of their betrayal. And if you're reading this because something similar has happened to you, because someone you trusted has shattered your world and left you wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, I want you to know this. You will not just survive this. If you choose to, if you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding, you will thrive. The woman who walked into that office and found her husband with her daughter-in-law, she was broken by what she saw. But the woman who walked out of the courthouse 3 months later, who redecorated her house and traveled to Paris and learned photography and started a new career, she was unbreakable. Because sometimes the ending isn't about getting back what you lost. Sometimes it's about discovering you never needed it as much as you thought you did. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, on your own terms, without apology or explanation or the need for anyone else's approval. That's my story. That's how a 65-year-old woman transformed transformed the worst betrayal of her life into the beginning of her best chapter. And if I can do it, trust me, so can you.